today we are going to hear from Dr. Justin Smith, the Kansas Animal Health Commissioner from the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and he's going to speak about an event that I've been able to attend the last few years, and I have found it very, very informational and very useful, and would encourage any legislators to take part in it when possible. It's in December. So it's the foreign animal disease exercise, and he's going to give an overview of what happens. So Dr. Smith, welcome to committee.
Nope, now it is. Cool, got it. No, appreciate the opportunity to come forward and visit with you folks and frankly highlight something that we are. We're pretty proud of our FAD exercise and our program that we have over at Kansas Department of Ag. And so I'm going to take a few minutes this afternoon to kind of highlight what we do and some of the rationale behind it and why we do think it's important. And so past history and as far as we will foresee in the future, we deal with a disease in our exercise called foot and mouth disease. I'm not sure how much knowledge you have of the disease, but it's what we call the granddaddy of them all from the livestock world, and the fact that it's the most contagious disease that we have out there in the livestock industry would truly impact our industries significantly, both from a animal welfare component, from an economic loss component, and in lack of trade, future in our trade. So it is something we take very seriously and something that we continually work on and practice around, and the exercise is kind of the culmination of that on a yearly basis. So next slide, please. So, whoop, I messed you up backward. There you go, cool. So one of the things that we do is when we first start, we look at our needs assessment. We look at what that exercise can provide for us, what we need to investigate, what we need to look at. A lot of that is from just experience. Frankly, a lot of it comes from the previous year's after action reports, what we've done in the industry as far as talking to that, and then just new research and everything we know from foot and mouth disease in general. So we come back and we talk about what our needs assessments are, what we need to look at in Kansas as far as our better response, and what do we feel like we don't have nailed down yet. So each year we start with that. We found that there's been tremendous value over the last 11 years in doing these. And so we're going on our 12th year of doing these on a continual basis. From my knowledge, we're the only state in the nation that has done that. Even from a USDA perspective, there's nothing that's had that kind of intensity that we practice on those foot and mouth disease exercises. So part of that. So with that, some of the benefits, and you can read the slides as well as I can, we try to identify what gaps may be out there as far as our response plans. What do we need to do? What do we need to assess? Relooking at industry each and every year and what their business practices are and how our response plans are going to impact those folks, and then how we can mitigate the amount of damage or the amount of insult we may have on those individual operations as we develop those capabilities. The other thing it does is it helps us validate those plans and procedures. Sometimes we do get it right, and so it helps us validate that, hey, this is a process that we can do in the Kansas and that we will do that. And then most definitely, it improves our collaboration with our stakeholders. So a disease of this impact is obviously going to encompass more than the Kansas Department of Ag. So we have a lot of stakeholders, we have a lot of partnering agencies, different divisions, different departments here in the state, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it also gives us the opportunity to drive some policy changes. And that's the thing I guess I've seen from the Kansas perspective. Again, doing them for 11 years, there's been policy that we've implemented here in the state of Kansas that the national policy has picked up on. And so we have that opportunity to help drive some of those policy changes that fit our industry better than maybe some of the other states have out there. So it obviously gives us some leverage in that realm. Next slide, please. So our exercise is, if you talk to the exercise purist, ours is kind of a hybrid between a functional and a full-scale exercise. We don't arbitrarily just deploy a lot of resources out in the field, but we do on occasion. And so depending, again, what that scenario brings forward, we'll dispatch veterinarians to go out and do investigations on facilities, and we'll talk about what an investigation looks like. We'll dispatch veterinarians as site managers to help talk about what does that after action look like as far as euthanasia, proper disposal, that type of thing. So we do have some level of full scale, but a lot of it is functional in the fact that we actually come together, we have the conversations, and we play this scenario out. It is a simulated scenario, but I will tell you, and many of you that have been there, the intensity and the realism of it over those 3-day period, it doesn't feel like it's a scenario. It doesn't feel like it's simulated. It really, you walk away from those days beat and worn out. We can't imagine what it's going to look like from a real perspective. So it does give us that opportunity to do that. We utilize various levels of government. We talk about response organizations, volunteer groups, and then again, the industry. And I can't say it enough that the industry is truly impactful in our exercise and how we play these games. So the scenario is a scenario that builds upon itself. We'll start out with whatever the place may be in the exercise that we may start out with. And then as the scenario goes, the scenario impact builds upon itself as far as injects that come into us. But more than not, the players build their own injects. So the conversations we have in part of that and how we respond to a certain situation may be a positive on a farm. And then that farm will come back and say, well, what about this? And that stimulates the additional injects that we have. And so as much as we feel like we have a plan in the exercise, man, we'll go off all kinds of rabbit trails every now and then. And that's where the value comes in this thing, is really talking about some of the things that we haven't anticipated that the industry and the folks that are playing bring to us. So one of the highlights of these exercises, and I've said it more than enough, is that we actually play with real producers. So we'll go out there as we're developing our current exercise, we're going out and we're asking for volunteers. And if you want to play, tell us how you want to play. Do you want to be a farm that's infected and understand how we're going to respond? Do you want to be a neighbor to an infected facility? Or do you want to be a milk processor that understand how you can continue to receive and move milk in the case of an FMD outbreak? And so we play with real participants in the state of Kansas. That helps us because we're using real data. We're using their data. We don't have to make it up. We don't make it up wrong. We're actually using what they bring to us and as far as movements and commodities and producer impact and that type of thing that we're playing with. Next slide. So on the screen now so I just picked the last 4 years of our exercise and kind of went over some of the focus areas that we've looked at. Again, we sat down at the very beginning and right now we're planning for 2025, but we're sitting down and talking about where's our deficiencies, where's our needs with that. So back in 2021, we titled it Armor, and we looked at our vaccination plans. So we have a vaccination plans for foot and mouth disease out there. We wanted to test it. We wanted to see whether that was going to work from an industry's perspective, and so we did do that. 2022, obviously with COVID, we lost a lot of folks in our what I call our IMT team, our incident management team. We had a lot of folks that left, so we ended up having a relatively new team back in 2022. So we went back and started at Genesis. We started at the beginning. We started about when is this outbreak? Where does it start in the United States? What are we doing to respond to that when it's in some other state? But then likewise, as it progresses and we get it into our state, how are we responding to us with that? So that was a great opportunity to bring all those new players up to speed and basically reinforce from my perspective about what are we doing from the very beginning. Looking at stop movements in the case that if it's in another state across the nation, and what are we looking like from that perspective from a livestock world. Then in 23, that was our 10th anniversary. So we ended up having pathways. And again, I laugh at the word anniversary. It's something we celebrate, but at the same time, it's not a lot of fun going through these days. And really, it does keep you awake at night, realizing some of the impact that this is going to have. But we did focus on our response plans. What does our plan look like in the state of Kansas? What are we going to be asked to do? And then what are we going to do so that we can go out and reinforce that to our trading partners, whether it be internationally or other states, that, hey, we're doing the right thing and we're doing it here. And so you can be comfortable in the fact that when you decide to accept our beef or accept our cattle or accept our sheep or goats, that you're okay with that, and that we can prove to you that we've done the right thing, and that the risk that we're presenting to your state is minimal. So that's the good thing about some of these exercises. Then lastly, obviously, Watchtower is what we called it. We wanted to look at the surveillance plan. So from a disease response, there's a level of surveillance that's going to happen around these facilities, these positive facilities. And so we looked at our plans. One, could we identify where we need to go do the surveillance? And then two, could it be done? It's outlined in the FMD Red Book is what we call it, the USDA guide. It's outlined to what that surveillance looks like, should look like. So we wanted to see whether we could do it. Frankly, we wanted to prove to it that it couldn't be done. And so we wanted to help drive that policy about doing some of those things. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly. But in 2025, one of the things that we're going to try to do is look at vaccine distribution. And so as the vaccine comes in, there's going to be a level of accountability that's going to be required for that vaccine. And so what does it look like for us to be able to get that vaccine out to the field in a timely manner? It doesn't do us any good sitting in a bottle. And so how can we get it to the industry? How can we get it to the practitioners? How can we get it to the producers in a fast and rapid model? So we've got a model. We've got a plan that we think like we can. Likewise, when we use that vaccine, like I said before, there's some accountability to it. So we have to know which animals that it went into, because if we're ever going to get back our free status with that vaccine, we have to know that those animals have been processed and slaughtered appropriately. And so the data management of knowing where that vaccine went, what animal it got into, is going to be instrumental, and we've got to figure out how to do that. So again, we've got some ideas. We've got a plan down. We want to test it, and that's what we're looking for in 2025 with our new exercise. Yet to be named, but we've got some cool people that come up with some really neat names, and so we'll see what that looks like here in December. Next slide, please. There it is. Okay. So Watchtower 2024. So we had over 200 participants that played with us in this exercise. And a lot of those folks end up being in our KDA office, is where our Incident Command Center is going to be located at. But at the same time, we had a lot of allying agencies and a lot of allying departments playing with us. Kansas Highway Patrol, Kansas Department of Transportation played with us, Wildlife Services, Kansas Wildlife and Parks played with us. And so all of those folks will be part of our response mechanism. They're going to be part of it. They're going to have their detail that they're going to need to do, but we're going to call upon them to help be our partner in this deal. And they know that. They've played with us as far as I can remember. And it's really remarkable because they actually send some folks over and sit down at our table. They're embedded within our incident management team, and they help us go through that process. Likewise, we have multiple programs within KDA that involve. So again, during that exercise, 3 days, I commend our secretary because it's all hands on deck. And so we have folks that's from all of our different agencies, whether they be water, whether they be with our food safety, our meat and poultry. They put away their day job and they come down and they be part of our exercise and help us out with that prospect. The other thing we do is we play with other states. And so any states that want to be involved, we get calls, I won't say daily, but constantly from other states saying, hey, we want to see what you do, we want to replicate it, and we want to be a part of your exercise. And so we'll invite them to be a part of that. We'll invite them to play as themselves. If they want to play as like it, for instance, Ohio that was here this last year, we'll set up a scenario that Ohio was impacted. And Ohio played, and they happen to be involved in this year because they have a sister dairy to some of our dairies here in the state of Kansas. And so how did we approach that, and how did they approach that to one, to help facilitate the continuity of business, but two, how do they facilitate if we have a positive and we've moved animals back and forth between there for the last month? And so what's that look like? So we welcome those folks to come play. They'll have their own little office that that's their sovereign state at that point in time. And so they play it themselves if they decide to want to be there. They provide a lot of input and a lot of ideas to us with that. This last year, we also had the opportunity to play with some Canada representatives. So we had representatives here from the Alberta Beef Producers, the National Alberta Cattle Feeders Association, as well as the Canadian Cattle Association. So they were in Manhattan in our office those 3 days and played. We talked about what does it look like from a Canadian perspective of moving animals back and forth or moving product back and forth in the case that FMD was in the United States. Likewise, what are we going to do if it's in Canada and what that looks like? So it was a great opportunity to really engage with those folks, they're boots on the ground type folks, and talk about what their operations look like and what can they provide as surety that we're okay in trading animals post FMD. We also had K-State, obviously. We had Iowa State play with us. The other thing we did this year is we kind of replicated. So the Kansas Department of Emergency Management wanted to play with us as well, but they wanted to do it like they normally would, and the fact that they would stand up the State Emergency Operations Center. So they actually did. They played in the SEOC. So all of those allying agencies that I talked about, they had the representatives in the SEOC as well. So we talked about that and what that looked like, and we had briefings each day to talk about what would you be doing, what we'd be doing, and we actually played in the scenario and pushed things back and forth. But again, I can't emphasize enough the numerous industry and nonprofit organizations that play, that help us out. And so, we have milk cooperatives that play and talk about how that movement of milk is going to concur. Feed companies, meat packers. We had all three major meat packers in our office this last December and talking about what's that look like from their perspective and how do we get product to them. The renderers always come with a unique set of questions and injects to talk about as far as how we're going to navigate disposal of carcasses and that stuff. Livestock haulers, the trucking industry is all going to be impacted. How are they involved? But then also the partnering companies, the partnering operations that play with us and building the scenario out. So that's what's unique about the Kansas exercise, and really that's what we're doing it for them, and so let's figure out how to get them involved and have that conversation. And they've helped project that conversation and project those policies out there to really, it's a much easier conversation with our Kansas folks than a lot of states have the luxury of having. Next slide, please. So again, talking about how we do it, we sat down early on and we talked about what we wanted to accomplish in this exercise. And so one of them was to develop and implement a surveillance plan. And as I mentioned before, the Red Book plan right now is pretty intensive as far as about what kind of surveillance, what kind of continual surveillance we need to do in that, what we call the control zone or those operations around there. So first of all, we had to be able to identify what operations were actually there. We frankly have a pretty good knowledge of a lot of our major operations in the state of Kansas, but we don't know all the backyard flocks or herds and all of the backyard sheep and goat opportunities out there. I mean, we don't know where they're at. So how do we go about assessing who those folks were without driving around and spreading the virus all over? So that was a dilemma. We wanted to practice that and see what different opportunities that we have out there. Likewise, the amount of testing that needs to go in that control zone, we don't have enough people to do it. And so we wanted to assess what that looks like and try to figure out how we're going to accommodate that and really how many samples was going to be taken. And so we took an area around our positive premises. We played with a large dairy in western Kansas this year. And so we took all the facilities around there and assessed how many samples were out there. Frankly, we opened up USDA's eyes a little bit and the fact that, wow, we're not sure that can be done. And so they're going back to the table now to talk about what is an achievable surveillance plan around one of these positive facilities. Yet to be determined. The Red Book's getting rewrote as we speak. There's a committee re-looking at that Red Book. And so, but we are at the table and they've taken what we learned from that and the speed that it takes and the drag on surveillance, and they're going to take that into consideration. So that was a big part of what we wanted to test and to prove this year at our exercise. The other thing we wanted to look at is some of these large facilities this last year. How do we accommodate a multi-thousand head facility, and how do we timely euthanize those animals and dispose of them in a manner when you're talking about an operation that has 20,000 dairy cows, let alone an operation that has 100,000 head of feeder cattle? How are we going to go in there and do that? So is there an opportunity to look at a manage in place, what I say? These animals will survive this. They will heal up. It does impact them. And so how do we get past that? And we worked on that. We obviously knew that we were going to have more questions than answers based on that one, and we were right. We come out with a lot more questions. So I don't know that we've determined a way to do that, make that happen yet. But again, that's some of the conversations that's happening from a national level to talk about how can we do that. Because frankly, by the time we get done euthanizing even a 50,000 head feed yard, those animals have healed up and survived, and they're going on about their business. And so what are we going to do? There's a lot more to that, because now we have to convince our trading partners that we've done the right thing with that positive herd, and that we don't have a nidus of infection sitting out there. So there's a lot more to just the logistics of doing it. The other thing is that we wanted to figure out a way. One of our problems we've always identified in ours is situational awareness between all the different people that are involved, and you folks likewise. How do we develop a situational awareness without imposing and without disclosing information on positive premises that might be incriminating or might be negative to those folks? And so that was one of the things we worked on this last year, was figuring out some sort of a mechanism with internally, how do we do situational awareness, but also from a media perspective and from an outside player perspective, what does that look like and how do we play that out a little bit? So we did play with that. Again, I'm not sure that we come up with a solid answer on that yet, but we know we've found some things not to do. And so we will. One of the things we do is we never refer to that operation by its name, by its public name. If you ever play in our exercises, or if you ever see one of our disease responses, we'll always talk about it as being County 01 or County 02, whichever premises it happens to be in that county. That, again, is to try to maintain some level of confidentiality for that operation. And so how do we do that? That was something that we recognized early on with some of the new players is that they didn't recognize that. And so we had to circle that again and talk about what that naming nomenclature does and why we do some of the things that we do. Next slide. So this slide's pretty busy, but I just wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about what some of the things we gain out of that. This is probably as equally, if not more important than the actual play, is what do we learn from that? Because it is an exercise, and we all walk away from there breathing a sigh of relief, knowing that this wasn't the real thing. But the idea is to make sure that we can take away some lessons out of there. So again, I've got a list of all of those, some of those out there. We talked about some of the strengths is that, so we practice using our IMT practices a command center, the incident command center, which is what the military, the fire folks, the police folks all utilize, is that incident command system. We will utilize that as well. So it helped our players understand what their role was. Again, they may be an admin assistant in the water division yesterday, but today they may be our planning section chief as far as in our incident. So what does that look like and how do we do that? So it helps them practice that role. We start long before the exercise day of bringing those people up to speed and developing what their job duties are, frankly, as a member of the incident commands team or the team. The other thing it does is allow us to collaborate. I mean, again, we don't always get to talk to our lying agencies. We don't always get to talk to you folks like we should. And so this gives us another opportunity to collaborate and to talk about the concentrate that conversation down to foreign animal disease response and what does that look like. And so the collaboration is a huge part of that. Again, gives us a training opportunity to respond to FMD, knowing, understand. FMD, I talked about, was the most contagious, so it gives us the opportunity to pre-practice how we're going to get on and off a farm safely, how we're going to set up that biosecurity, how we're going to do an FAD investigation. Also gives us the opportunity to demonstrate from a producer perspective of what does an FAD or what does a foreign animal disease diagnostic investigation look like so that they're aware. Gives us the opportunity to ask the questions of their operation and what kind of movements they have. A lot of these folks have tremendous sets of records. They just don't have it in a way that helps us as far as doing an epidemiological trace of that disease. And so it's opened up some eyes there. And then again, I mentioned before, and I won't reiterate a lot, but just the fact that we're able to drive current policy and develop some new policies as far as how we're going to respond to that. We wouldn't walk away from it if we didn't have things we needed to improve upon, and One of the things that we highlight, and we've highlighted at every exercise, and again, I'm not sure how we're going to deal with it until the time comes, is we don't have enough people. When we talk about the phone bank of answering questions and dealing with public inquiries and that type of thing, just even the responders. I mean, I want to be able to keep a certain level of our veterinarians what I call clean, meaning that they haven't been on a positive premise, so they can still go out and do new investigations or still do the work that needs to do otherwise. But again, when you have 7 veterinarians, that's hard to think that you're going to keep some of those folks clean. So how do we empower, how do we bring up our workforce? And I'm not sure we have that answer yet. We foresee that any kind of an FAD response or FMD response is going to be a 24-hour deal. And so how are we going to navigate that and replicate that personnel needs? So that's one of the things that we always recognize. It was IVent this last year as well, and so we've got to figure out how to get more people and how to get them up to speed. I've already mentioned the terminology component of it, incorporate more frequent briefings, that situational awareness component of it. And then probably the big thing that came out of it from my perspective, we have a policy room there. So we have folks they're in the policy arena, whether it's the legislators, whether it's the governor's office, or whether it's USDA leadership. They'll send leadership to our state and play with us those 3 days. But the funding model, what does it take? And there's different funding models out there. USDA has their cooperative agreement model that they use that we work with each and every day, and that's where the indemnity dollars is going to come from. But KDM uses FEMA, and FEMA's got a different funding model. And so trying to navigate where certain costs need to go and where certain costs need to be moved to in that respect. So again, from a state perspective, we know that our KDM folks have some emergency operational funds that we can utilize, but at the same time, we don't want to exhaust those funds if we have other capabilities through our USDA partnerships. And so that was a challenge this year that we dealt with, and so we've got to better understand that, and we got to get the people that keep the money to better understand that too, as far as how we're gonna do that, and who do we ask for a set of chutes or a set of pins? Where's the appropriate ask? Again, we tend to want to go to the county level first to see if they have it, but at the same time, a lot of those response capabilities are reimbursed through a cooperative agreement through USDA, and so again, we've got to figure out how to navigate that. So these are just a few of the things out there. There was many more of them out there that we actually identified, and we're working on those right now. But yeah, these were the highlights of that post of it. So with that was kind of a fast and rapid, and I do thank you for the opportunity. Happy to address any questions, or if I didn't cover anything appropriately, happy to do so as now.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Just go over briefly foot and mouth disease and the economic impact, and then just say, like, an overview of those 3 days, how it started and how things evolved and the decisions that were made to try to mitigate the process.
Sure. So yeah, foot and mouth disease, again, is a virus that's out there. It's in the world. About 70% of the world is impacted with it. We have the luxury of calling ourselves free. We're free without vaccination and have been since 1929. The last time we had it in the United States was in 1929. But we continually see new outbreaks of it happen. It's a virus of our hooved stock. So anything that is our hoof stock out there other than horses. So our split hoof stock is what I should say. So the sheep, goats, swine, cattle, llamas, camels, anything that's got that split hoof, they're susceptible to the foot and mouth disease. Our cervid, our wild deer, feral pigs are all involved in that conversation. It is, I won't get into a lot of detail. There's multiple serotypes out there and multiple things. And so that plays into the fact of how our response looks, because we have to know which serotype we have to be able to know which vaccination to use, because the vaccinations are not cross-protective. Again, it's not legal to have the vaccines in the United States until we have the disease. And so we don't have any available vaccine here in the United States today. We have in our national veterinary stockpile and in our vaccine banks, we have the precursor to it. And I replicate it a lot like the orange juice concentrate. But once we decide to use it, once we determine which serotype we're going to do, it's got to be sent overseas and be reconstituted or reactivated. So then it comes back. So I say all this in the fact that there's going to be a downtime from the time we first recognize that we have the disease. There's a period of time in there, 10 to 14 days, that we don't have vaccine. So we're going to have to be able to respond appropriately without that tool in our toolbox right then. We know that we're going to make the request the minute we have the opportunity to do so, but it is going to be a downtime with that. The disease itself is, like I said, can be carried basically through any bodily fluid, but probably more importantly, can be conveyed in the wind, can be conveyed in ourselves, as far as, you know, we're not infected with it, but we can be the carrier of it or the vector of it in our nasal cavities, on our clothes, on our boots. And so biosecurity is going to be an ultimate response and a capability here. So them are the things we practice as well. So in the case of Watchtower, we wanted to investigate some of those things. I talked about the surveillance and the vaccine opportunities that come farther along in the process. And so we actually developed a time jump with this exercise. So it actually started in Georgia. This outbreak started in Georgia. And we got word from a National Assembly call and USDA call that Georgia had a positive. And so at that point in time, we implemented our stop movement. What our plan says is we're going to implement a stop movement if it's any place in the United States or the lower 48 states. So we implemented a stop movement across the state that involved anything that was susceptible commodities as well as susceptible species were not allowed to move into the state or within the state until we could wrap our hands around that. USDA will issue that same EO. So they'll do it nationally for a 72-hour period at the very least. So once we determined it was in Georgia, we immediately started looking at what the surveillance looks like. What does it look, surveillance, the trace-ins that we may have been impacted with from that. The scenario kept progressing to the pack to where we eventually were exposed, and we did end up with a positive facility here in the state. That ended up being a 25,000 head dairy that actually they wanted to play and see, is there a way that for them to keep operating in the face of a foot and mouth disease outbreak? Again, we didn't answer that question, but we did get a lot of questions, and so a lot of things that we're going to continue to investigate. We also built a scenario that we ended up with a farm down in the Great Bend area that was a positive facility as well. What was unique about that, and we have law enforcement play with that, so we always got to throw them a bone every now and then too. And so that ended to be traced back to some local lone wolf terroristic activity, the fact that they brought the virus to that facility and infected that. And so there's a whole scenario and backstory to that the law enforcement folks were able to go through and practice how they're going to do it. And that's important because frankly, we're all going to be on that same facility and we're going to be trying to contain disease and they're going to be trying to collect evidence and everything else that they need to have to do that investigation. So how do we coordinate? How do we collaborate with those folks as well? So like I said, we played through that 3-day period. We did have another small dairy that was, and we worked through that process of how are we going to euthanize those cows? How are we going to properly dispose of those cows? And so we worked that with that dairy facility as well. That impacted a dairy processor that happened to be within the control zone. So how are we going to continue to get milk into that facility safely and get trucks out of that control zone that we're not spreading that vaccine? So again, that was just the one Watchtower. I have to give the kudos to our contractors that we work with as far as developing this scenario. They come up with some wild things and it really taxes you as far as what that conversation is.
So a couple more things. When you guys are calling or doing anything, you have to say, this is an exercise. So what Dr. Smith just talked about did not really happen, but it was part of the scenario from last fall.
Very true. We have media in the building and we have media play and I didn't say this, but we simulate press releases and we simulate interviews and stuff like that. And we do it with real media that are there playing to understand how this has. So we want to make certain that is never gotten out, that it may be a notion that we have FMD in the state of Kansas. So every phone call we answer, every conversation we start with says that this is an exercise. And every time we end one of those, it's in big roll print on our emails, this is an exercise. And so, we're very cognizant of the fact that some folks can hear partial conversations and we want to make sure that hasn't escaped, for lack of a better way of saying it.
And so how can you find, it happened in Georgia. This is an exercise. It started in Georgia. How can you find any cattle in Kansas that might have come from Georgia?
So I will tell you, we have a partial data set. So anytime that an animal moves from a farm to farm into the state of Kansas, they're required to have a certificate of veterinary inspection prior to that move. And so we have those. They submit a copy to us. We have that in our database. So when we found that it was in Georgia, we were able to put in the town that they came from, and then we pulled up all the CVIs that had come from Georgia in the last 14 days. We looked 14 days back. The downside of that is that any of those animals that come into our packing facility are not required to have a CVI because there's inspection at the facility, or anything that comes into our livestock markets is not required to have a CVI because they're being inspected at the livestock market. So I say we have a partial data set out there as far as what that is. The other thing we want to be able to do is if there's a set of animals that come from there and then got dispersed in Kansas, we want to be able to trace those out. And so, you know, if they have an official ID in their ear, we're able to do that very readily. We can put that official ID and it'll pick up in our database. But if they don't, and not all animals are required to have it, we miss out on that a little bit. So part of that is our connection with Georgia. I mean, we're on a phone call with Georgia at that point in time and say, what can you tell us about this facility? What can you tell us to help give us any clue to where we can start that preemptive surveillance?
And my final question is, in the Department of Agriculture's budget, I believe it was $250,000, correct me if I'm wrong, to actually plan and implement this exercise. So that's part of when KDA brings their budget to us and we see the foreign animal disease exercise, that's what we're paying for.
Yep, that is. I will say, historically, we've used money from a Homeland Security grant. But as times have gone on, it's been harder and harder to fit that square peg into that round hole, to fit their funding models. They're more looking at terroristic activities and stuff of that sort, cybersecurity and all that. So yes, thank you. We did get some additional money last year for this program, and so we did get the $250,000. That helps us put this exercise on, help us put the drills together that go on, has been instrumental. And frankly, it was going to be harder and harder to continue this program without it. So I do thank you for that very much.
And so this is a preventive measure in the event that this ever happens, that we're going to be that much farther ahead than any other state. So any other questions from the committee? Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Smith, for being here today. Appreciate your attendance. Given the fact that there are so many cattle on feed in Kansas, in our nation, given the fact there's so many dairies, swine operations, pork production, exports, tell me why the concentrate vaccine for foot and mouth disease is held out of our country instead of inside of our country.
So let me clarify a little bit. So it's in our country. The concentrate is here. It's in our vaccine banks. It's off on Plum Island. Will soon be here, moved to Manhattan in that. But the reconstitution of it right now, that federal laws doesn't allow that constituted vaccine to be on the United States proper until we have the disease here.
I see. Okay, thank you for that.
Yes.
Any other questions? Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today. Do you do exercises for other diseases or just foot and mouth?
So we do them off cycle. So we work with African swine fever is one that we've dealt with quite a bit. Not to this level. Again, we always look at the FMD model as probably if we can respond to FMD, we can probably respond to the other diseases, and the fact that ASF is only a one species disease, a swine disease, obviously. And so we do play with those, and we build our plans appropriately for those throughout the year. But the FMD is what is concentrated on this exercise program that we do in December.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I know we're hearing a lot about the avian flu, and saw that recently there was a transmission to, I think, a domesticated cats. So I'm just a little bit concerned about if we're doing any exercises or what we're doing to be preventive in that area.
So I will tell you, we have conversations all the time. And yes, I will say we're exercise it. We have a plan for high path and how we're going to respond. I mean, we have it in a, the unfortunate thing is we haven't had to exercise it because we've had to implement it. And so we've understood, over the last 2.5 years, we've responded to, I think we're 44 positive cases here in the state of Kansas. And, obviously that's not what the nation has had to do. But yeah, we've had to respond to that. And I don't say that, but yeah, we talk about and what does that approach look like differently? We take things from FMD that work and apply it to the high path. Likewise, we come backwards. It used to be high path was a poultry disease, and now obviously we're having to deal with multi-species, and so that does change our approach a little bit.
One last question.
Sure.
So why do you call it foreign, like big foreign, where does that originate, foreign disease?
Yeah. So foreign animal disease, what's the word I'm looking for? Transcontinental disease is another term with that. So again, it's those diseases that we don't recognize that we have here in the United States. Again, some are arguing that HPAI is here and it's not a foreign animal disease, but it's still listed on the foreign animal disease website, or well, not website, but the list. But it's those diseases that we don't have here in the United States and we want to make sure that we keep out.
Sure. Just to follow up on that, about the vaccines and about it being reconstituted. So it's a federal law that prevents that then from us producing that here or having that here?
And a lot of it is folks, is that, again, we enjoy the opportunity to have FMD free without vaccination. There's also a classification of FMD with vaccination that certain countries have out there. That restricts their trade a little bit. And so we've kind of got an open door as far as trade out there. A lot of those countries that have it. So, I'm not sure I understand why they made it illegal from the very beginning, but a lot of it is the fact that if you have it on your shelves, there's certain countries are going to ask, then why do you have it there if you're not using it type of a thing. So it's kind of a mentality component of it.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Dr. Smith, for being here. Appreciate it.
No, thank you. And again, I would echo Representative Moser, please come over. We'd invite you over anytime. Come over for part of it, a day, whatever. We'd like to highlight what we do because we're pretty proud of it. We want to be the most prepared state in the nation regarding foreign animal disease, and I really think we're there. If not the most, we're definitely in the top 10. So again,
Do you have dates set?
No, we don't.
Okay.
We may have, and I don't know them, but yeah, typically it's the second week in December. Yes. Okay.
All right, thank you very
folks.
much.
Appreciate it.
Any other announcements or comments? If not, we will be meeting again tomorrow, and we'll be having a presentation on the state water plan from the Department of Agriculture, the Water Office, and the Division of Environment. So we will see you tomorrow. We are adjourned.